Jan Ozer here. If you produce streaming media files, there are two free tools you need to know about: MediaInfo and Bitrate Viewer. In this tutorial, I'll show you why you need them and where to find them. Let's start with MediaInfo. You can download MediaInfo at this URL. And if you can't find it, just Google MediaInfo and download, and that'll take you right to here. Now, as you can see, it supports a bunch of different operating systems. And if you click over to the official Windows releases, you'll see that it supports both 32 and 64-bit operating systems. Let's look at the basic operation. So here's the tool, and we've got a file, h.264 in quicktime.mov, one of the files I collected to analyze in this tutorial. So what can we see here? We can see the video portion of the file encoded with the advanced video codec, that's h.264, the profile, whether CABAC or CAVLC was used for entropy encoding, how many reference frames were used, but not B frames, which would be nice. We can see the maximum bit rate, we can see the average bit rate, and then we can see that this file was encoded with variable bitrate encoding. And then what I find particularly convenient is the bits per pixel per frame, which shows how much compression is applied to each pixel. And that's a pretty good way to compare the compression applied to files with different resolutions. Scrolling on down to audio, we can see that this is AAC, no surprise. We can also see this is VBR, variable bitrate encoding for audio, 160 kilobits per second. Target, maximum was 167, and it was encoded in stereo. That's why we have two channels. Now, if that information isn't enough, you can click Debug and Advanced Mode, and you can get a whole bunch more information about the file. I typically don't do that. I find enough in the normal mode. Just wanted to show you that this was here. Let me close that. Now let's look at the types of files that this program can analyze. And this is where the utility really comes from. So here's an XDCAM-EX file produced in one of the JVC camcorders. It can analyze that. Here's an HDV file, no problem. H.264 in QuickTime, that's the one we started with. Here's an ABC HD file. Again, no problem. Here's OGG Theora, no problem. WebM loads just fine. And then, of course, VP6 you would expect to load, and it does. An F4V file, which is flash with H.264, no problem. And if you're still using Windows Media, again, no problem. In fact, if you want to just analyze a bunch of files at a time, just click them all, drag them in, and MediaInfo will do that. A lot of information there. Probably tough to see in the interface itself, but if you wanted to export that, you click that icon, and you can export it for a spreadsheet, a regular sheet, text, HTML, or customize it. So you can analyze a bunch of files, then export them, and then print them out or save them, whatever you want. But it's a pretty convenient tool when you're analyzing bunches of files. Let me show you a couple of configuration options you should know about. Number one, let's go here, Options, Preferences. Now some of these options aren't available on the Mac. I think they're just available on the Windows platform. Can't really vouch for the other operating systems that the program supports. Number one, you can choose which view you want to view the data in, and we'll look at that in a second. Number two, and this is what I find the most useful, is that an Explorer extension, if that's enabled, lets you come over here, right-click the media file and choose MediaInfo, and then analyze the file that way. And I find that very convenient because I'm analyzing files all day long, and it's nice not to have to go back to the Start menu or find the icon on the desktop to load the application. Just right-click, there it is, and you can analyze the file. And then let's look at the different views available to you. Here's Basic, here's Sheet View, here's Tree View, which is the one that I've got configured in as my default. Here's HTML, which is also useful. This is the one I use on the Mac, which doesn't have as many alternatives. And then you have XML, MPEG-7, PBCore 1.2, whatever that is, and a custom view that you can also define. So it's nice to be able to define these custom views in your preferences file, so whenever you open the program, the view that you like is showing. And again, you can do this on Windows, but you can't do that on the Mac. So MediaInfo gives you a ton of information. Probably the only thing it doesn't show you is a frame graph of the file itself. And that's why I like Bitrate Viewer. So let's come over here, and here's Bitrate Viewer. So what are we looking at here? These spikes are the per second data rate in the video file. And then this wavy line here is the average data rate of the video file over time. And then up here, of course, you've got the total time of the file, you've got the average bit rate, the peak bit rate right around here, And then if you look over here as I move the cursor, you can see the bitrate at any location in the file. Down here you can tell the resolution, you can tell the frames per second, and a little bit of additional data. So what does this view give us that you can't get from MediaInfo? Basically, it gives you a way to diagnose how well a file will play back under constrained conditions. So here, about 1 minute and 15 seconds in, we see that we've got a pretty significant data spike that goes from the average bitrate is around 1.1 megabits per second. It goes over 2.5 megabits per second for something like 8 or 9 seconds. Now if you're streaming over a constrained connection, that's going to stop playback, and this one's going to stop playback, and this one's going to stop playback. Without this view, you really have no way of understanding why the file will stop at 112 into the file. With it, it's totally obvious. And you can go back to your client and say, look, you need to encode with constrained variable bitrate encoding, or CBR, constant bitrate encoding, because the reason your file is stopping is because the data rate goes out of control at these locations in the file. Can't get that from MediaInfo. Now let me show you something interesting about Bitrate Viewer. Let me close the program.